And hello to everyone. I'm really excited to be here. Um, I'm going to get started straight away and introduce Rachel Mann because I want to hear lots and lots of poems. So Rachel Mann is a priest, writer, and broadcaster, and is the author of 13 books, including books of poetry, non-fiction, and a novel. She's a visiting teaching fellow at the Manchester Writing School and broadcasts regularly, including as a contributor to Thought for the Day, which I think you might have heard her on yesterday, apparently. Sometimes I do wonder if there are two Rachel Manns because she's hugely prolific as a writer, as well as having the day job that must come with its own unique challenges. Her debut collection, A Kingdom of Love, was published with Carcanet in 2019, but we're all here tonight to celebrate the launch of her second collection, Eleanor Among the Saints. I first heard Rachel read some of the poems from this book at Kendal Poetry Festival back in, I think, 2022. We'd invited Rachel to read because I liked the first book, which I thought was a mesmerising and ambitious debut, which managed to weave its way interrogating the nature of belief, suffering, and love in these beautiful lyric poems that were rich with allusions and full of sensuality. So it was a real treat to hear Rachel read from that book. But then she, in the second set, read some new work, which would ultimately go on to form part of Eleanor Among the Saints. And I was absolutely blown away. It felt like the dial and the intensity had been turned right up from the first collection, which is what we all want to do as poets. I think these are poems that place the body absolutely at the heart of spirituality. They're poems that explore trans identity, language, transformation. There's moving and beautiful elegies throughout the book. The presiding spirit of the collection is Eleanor John Reikener, a 14th century seamstress, embroiderer, and sex worker, who, as Rachel explains in the notes at the back, has been claimed in recent medieval studies as an example of a trans person living in medieval England. I won't say much more than this about Eleanor, as I think Rachel will do a much better job of introducing them. But I will say in the collection, Eleanor is a time traveller and a transformative body. She inhabits the body of a lyric poet. She talks to saints. She talks to us. She asks us to confront our ideas about how a person can be constructed or reconstructed, how bodies are made and unmade, and who gets to tell the story and how the story can be told. As well as the sequence about Eleanor, um, there's poems that look back at what it was like to work as a priest during the pandemic. There's this sense throughout the book that time is not linear, but circular, that history can repeat itself, that story and poetry can allow us to move across time, or perhaps more accurately, to inhabit more than one time, a kind of folding over time. Andrew Macmillan said on the back of the book, nobody else could have written this. Poems formed in the space where divinity, the body, trans identity, and history fold together, a singular, sensational collection. So please welcome, with whoops and hollers and cheers in the chat box, Rachel Mann.
Thank you, Kim. That's so kind, and you are incredibly generous. It's really great to join you this evening. And in so many ways, Kim's already captured what the heart of this collection is about. I think at the heart of the matter is my attempt to, I guess, create an imaginary archive for this recovered figure, Eleanor Reichner. And I can only testify to my gratitude to friends who are medievalists, most particularly Dr. Daisy Black, for introducing me as a contemporary trans person to one of my ancestors. I say in the notes, I guess my poems about Eleanor, written through imaginary versions of her as seamstress, sex worker, as wife, widow, and most of all as a near contemporary of medieval saints like Julian of Norwich, Marjorie Kemp et al., represents my own attempt at an imaginary archive. So I think if we could see the poems, that would be great. Thank you. Embroidering a priest. In the beginning, hem and line of thread, a tug, a song of praise, arms raised orange-wise, sanctus, sanctus, sanctus. Let those with ears hear, love and love. Before he enters sanctuary, I shall speak direction of twist, all those loops whipped, corded, doubled and open, thrill of flounce and picot. I stitch him slow, so slow, he doesn't recognize his nearness to completion. He shall appear ex nihilo, blessed with cordonnet, beautiful embellishment, if only he knew my skill, such relief, my talent. When he raises host, he, I, we shall be complete. He will forget, we all do, the mysteries of his making, a birth. He will be all flounce, a skin, layers of bride mesh. He shall know folds. So Eleanor claimed to have had sex with priests, perhaps gestured at towards there when she was also an embroiderer. She embroidered priests' clothing. Perhaps she had sex with priests too. I wanted to imagine her among her contemporaries, imagine her as a contemporary of saints. And in this next sequence, which forms the poem, the title poem of the book, I place her in conversation with three medieval, broadly speaking, medieval saints. First poem relates to St. Catherine of Siena, famous for only being able to digest the host of God, and who reputedly used twigs rammed down her throat to make herself regurgitate conventional food. The second poem to St. Catherine of Alexandria, the most popular saint in the Middle Ages, from whom we get the famous Catherine wheel. The myth has it that when she escaped from the wheel of death, when God made it explode, 50,000 onlookers died. And finally, St. Perpetua, an early martyr of the church, who reputedly changed sex from female to male at the moment of her death in the Roman arena. Eleanor among the saints. Is it a surprise that those who force sticks down their throats, yes, you, Cat, you, I see you and know, is it a surprise that I've learned the meaning of bodies? The holy angels, the cherubim and seraphim burn my lips with coals, Salah, Salah. Is it such a surprise, Cat, that all I know of bodies I know from you? For bodies, read flesh, read meat. For meat, read delicious contradiction. We don't know what they can do or what limit is. Taste Jesus, taste even the nails of his toes. We know not limit except in the test. Let me test you, Cat. Let me think of what it must feel like to taste bark, bark on palate, a stick on tonsils. No one made you do it, Cat, did they? I'm almost too scared to try. I've tried so many things, most alien and kind. I'm so scared. Since when did that stop me? I dream of sticks of ash and oak, birch, elm. Would willow tickle, not hurt? Beneath my mind are twigs, cast-offs of tree. Terror, I dream. I have seen fear and hope. Let me in, love. You know I care. Not so different for you, Cat. Jesus, take me now. Before I gag, I dream that the bite, necessary and sufficient, that my lick will make him disappear, the divine. Broken, departed, and when he finds his way out, do you even know me, Cat? He shall be a tiny god lost in underworld. I have come to accept that salvation has cruelty inscribed into its honey sweet new day, Catherine. Yes, Queen, ain't that a fact? Cruelty is one way to say God. Think Abraham, a ram and near knifed son. Does anyone recover from a God like that? Consider Christ himself, his beating world without end. But you, Catherine, you light up the sky, born as the wheel dies, all glory be, oohs and ahs, crowd. What did you feel like to be translated into saint? I think of blades. What language can you hear? I think of blades, their grace as they fall, and crowd 50,000. A little boy points, his smile, perhaps you were already beyond Catherine, as blades fell already. What language do saints speak? As a child, I cheered when we carried you through streets. Everyone's pin-up, yes, queen. I ready to be knifed for glory's sake. Magno gaudens gaudio, rejoice, you company of boys. Come, Catherine, make of me my parts. Make me. Once, when I was young, I was shown Dauerwunder, love's harvest in a vial, liquid and bright, shred of you, your blood, Perpetua, word without end, thou lasting miracle. Grant me forgiveness, sister, brother, pet. I get lost in words, their syllables, forget their moral point. Oh, Dauerwunder, enough to see your shape written down, naked on page. All lovely words become porn. Dauerwunder, oh, to trace your trifong, to taste you, tongue. Does that make me the worst kind of sinner, pet? I would smash vial for you, feel you on hands, priest of the sanguine mysteries perpetually. I would travel with you, pet, into arena, witness, lover, friend. I shall be more than lasting miracle. Loss of breast, of vulva, vagina, womb, loss of hips, loss, O reliquary. I shall witness grace, its works, a change in light and fact, a change perpetua. For all time, pet, your body refined, liquid and bright. I could be reliquary too, not man, not woman, not end. I was trained in philosophy and never quite lost the habit of the pretentiousness that generally comes with having read a lot of Aquinas and Aristotle. I wanted to find a way of being incredibly playful and articulating, I mean, dare I say it, shall we say, an almost fake, well, a fake Middle English, but also an English which is still readable, but also pushes at the edge of sense. And I wanted to find a way of speaking Eleanor's voice and kind of give her the dignity of those medieval philosophers like Aquinas and their extraordinary ideas about how being works and how it's possible to both look one way as a piece of bread might, yet also actually be in substance the body of Christ. Aquinas on being. Because a small error in the beginning grows enormous at the end. Aristotle. He who is husband swived me, licked me, nay villain, nay knave, but free man wived and swived me. I hold testimony, a nesting of truth in heart, breast, belly. My soul swells to clean mother in heaven, a her girl. No error, a free man, a very Jesu, nimmed me beautiful. He cram thy belly, he said, till apple gorged. He cram thy guts with babby, and let dugs squirt till bell of heaven stint. I believed. I too, a fullness, emptiness, like woman beshitten at birth, or man qualmed. I can be fullness, if him a fullness, if him shining with divine yet bred substance accidents. I too a wiving, all sacral, hymen bust, and if not seen as such, at least in version you made, a fabling, like rude, I'll lodge in dream. Eleanor was a near contemporary of Mother Julian of Norwich and Marjorie Kemp, two of my favourite medieval saints. I like to imagine what it would be for her to be them, to be a contemporary of them, to be folded into their story. Mother Julian famously spoke of the hazelnut as holding all of God, all of creation, and Marjorie famous for her ugly tears. Eleanor as Julian as Marjorie. Hazelnut and tears, a meaning of eye. Consider the curve of salt water, its dribble down face. I am all meniscus holding back the edge of edge, and others might say ugly. I say holy. I swear there is nothing more beautiful than a face under pressure. Nothing more like hope and hazelnut. And last hazelnut survives and shows the eternity, goodness as the red of raw, face as worst of winter, world without end. If I do not make it to tree, not even sapling, my sealed up body, my fury, a sufficiency, more than enough. Universe is tears. Well, this was the poem I was kind of dreading coming to, and the one that I guess in some ways I feel most nervous about. A poem written in the shadow of the death of Brianna Jai, the trans girl, 16-year-old trans girl who was murdered in Warrington, and whose death I think shattered so very many of us. Um, yeah. Eleanor as a 16-year-old murdered trans girl. What is known? Safe is a conditional. Natural is easy. Oh, so. I am not restricted to your version. You did not need to know this. I am already subject to edits. I am the scene of a break-in. Requiem is vigil. Matter is a word with multiples. I am struggling to rise. I am all my own breath. I am not code for another's sins. You will recall my joy. My joy is not substitute. I did not know a body could be killed multiple times. I think this might be one such attempt. As Kim indicated, the collection has some poems which look back on what it was like to be a priest during the time of pandemic. And though I could readily have continued with a number of Eleanor poems, I wanted to give a sense of the sort of scope and arc of the collection, as it were. So a small number of poems from the section called Praise. And I really do struggle to write praise poems. I wonder if praise poems are the most difficult things to do. Um, but I've also tried to find a way in that section to find a way of inhabiting that traumatic time of pandemic in a way which is both speaks of me as a priest, but also, I guess, creates some distance as well, as is appropriate. I think in what poetry can do and achieve. Physician, heal thyself. The Lord be with you. And my mask slips from nose, flood of sweat already, and no sign of people, as in the days before, when eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage, until the day that Noe entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. I hear only masked, unmuffled sound, and with thy spirit. I shall trust as best I can. We are people, people of God, though would it matter if we were not? Bodies have always been diverse creatures, carriers of understandings, sin in skin and particle of breath. Perhaps we have become colonies for unseen. Whole armies march through. And this is a poem, I think, reflecting pretty much the first time I attended Holy Communion, um, uh, and wasn't presiding in the pandemic. Common prayer, all summary, all reminders too. Lay not up for yourselves treasure, rust and moth, all beseeching and oblations. I kneel as another priest dines on feast. O Lord, of thy goodness, and in this transitory life, trouble, sorrow, need, sickness, we bewail manifold sins and wickedness. I am famished. Forgiveness bloats my belly, and comfortable words flake my tongue. It has been so long since creature of bread and wine. And for such a time as this, O merciful Lord, grant us. I step forward, approach the altar, a supplicant. Priest drops God into my palms. God bathes my alcohol hands. I'd forgotten Creator, Redeemer, could be so light and intoxicant. I clasp him tight. I carry the universe back to my stall, a flesh reliquary. I eat alone. This is feast. I lick God from my palm. And finally, a couple of poems from the final section. The final section is called "A Charm to Change Sex," and I guess in some ways it's the section where, I mean, Kim talks about me upping the emotional ante a bit, I guess, the emotional intensity. And it does contain a sequence called Seven Proof Texts on a Transition Body, which I thought I'd love to read that, but we'd be here all night. It is, I think, a very intimate section of the book. Rather than go to that particular place, because I might end up welling up, and gosh, nobody needs to see a poet weeping, do they? I mean, gosh. I thought I'd finish with a couple of poems which perhaps frame my experience of being a trans person, of being a public trans person in a particular way. And so this particular poem, TDOR, hashtag TDOR, refers to the Trans Day of Remembrance. And I think it's fair to say that Trans Day of Remembrance is an incredibly emotive day of the year for trans people like myself. It's the day we remember 20th of November. We remember all those trans people who have been murdered. There's another way of putting it, murdered around the world in the previous year, and names are read out. And given that trans people represent such a tiny percentage of the world's population, the fact that hundreds of names, new names, are read out each year it's a shattering experience. And I don't mind admitting I find it an incredibly difficult day. But if I'm often asked to be a representative at such events. And sometimes I have been asked by organizations that want to do the right thing. They want to hold a TDOR event. And I admire them for that. But there can also be a kind of corporate clumsiness which comes with that. And I've tried to capture a little bit of that in the particular repetitions of this poem. This feels very much like a sort of performance piece rather than a bit of page poetry, although I'd like to feel that it has some credibility, some grit as a page poem as well. But as you hear the repetitions as they're read, I hope you begin to appreciate that emotional intensity that can come from reading names, but also sometimes, as I find myself, being cast into corporate environments where I feel like good people are wanting to do the right thing for the right reasons, and perhaps sometimes it doesn't quite work. Hashtag TDOR. Will you, would you, would you please come? We really do know how busy you must, and it would be. And season of remembrance too only makes more powerful. Amidst poppies and holy ones and time of shadow, it only adds to poignancy, remembering, and the lads and saints and all dead. And this year we want to make it extra special. So if you, and if not you, then could you suggest? We would want words. Let there be words, just the right amount. Perhaps you could shape words and names. We shall read names. Could you suggest how we read names? So many. A day where sad and name and list mean same. And some names, the pronunciation, but they matter, don't they? And you will agree. And each year, the words and the names and the candles, it's our privilege, a way to show we care for our community, our users asked. And we shall go outside, or we shall be outside already. We have names. We got names from website, so many. And we thought, what do you think? In batches of 10, we have readers, and we have you, of course. You could, if you would, read some. Eleanor, Elle, Laurel, Bryce, Angel, Kyle, Angelica, Eleanor, saints, souls, such a season as this, Saint Eleanor, Saint Kyle, and you, would you, perhaps you could say words about you, a story, say what it's like, what is trans? Is that the right word? And every year will you be present, speaking Eleanor, Elle, Laurel, Bryce, Angel, Kyle, Angelica, Eleanor, Jesus. And we know names matter to you and to us. And every year, St. Eleanor, St. Elle, Laurel, St. Bryce, St. Kyle, Martyr, and ditch, they say. Ditch, that's where they found a ditch. We want you present. Please don't stop. There are candles and ditch. Could you say words? And finally, the final poem, an envoi in the collection. Uh, I mean, I guess I'm really trying to hold the lyric here. It may, I fear, stumble into rant, um, but I guess it's a sort of reminder of where we started, which was with fabrication, with fabric, with the seamstress element, with stitching together, and perhaps maybe that's what we all are. And for Eleanor, there are people who say that she didn't exist. Well, that she is pure fabrication. Well, I guess I hope the fabrications are a reminder that we all participate in such things. We are all made of stuff. Au revoir. If at the end, fabrication, so all text is stitched, body too only subset of making, a stored magic, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, carbon and trace of trace, base and noble transmutations, a gifting. You too, recipient, a trace of trace, trans, queer, every name, a mutate of love, good and holy, trace of trace in you, trace of every name, despite your best efforts, your horror. No one and nothing, so very far from embryo or Eden, the wild play, from chromosome and myth, wondrous edits, additions, all of us hand-me-downs, a holy cause. Behold, she becomes they, all worm-gouged earth, or bed-worn and wet with fuck. Let us be lines, sewn into lines, a break. Thank you for listening. Thank you.
Rachel, that was fantastic. This is the bit I was kind of dreading having to speak after you finish reading because it feels like I just want to sit in that kind of poetry silence. And yeah, those poems were so moving, and the hashtag to door poem, um, I almost heartbreaking. I'm so glad you read another one after that, so I could kind of recover myself. And I'm there's a few questions in the Q&A box, which I'm going to come to in a moment to give other people a chance to put some more in as I'm talking. But I was just thinking about that poem and the way that you managed to place. It feels like the reader and the audience are really important throughout the collection anyway, but you place us not just as like passive kind of recipients of the poem. We become kind of witnesses, we become participants. And it allowed definitely I moved into a place of self-reflection when I read that poem, when I heard it about, careless ways I've used language, but somehow you do it so the reader doesn't move to a place of defensiveness. Um, it's not really a question, it's a it's a comment, but it links with me. It made me think of Claudia Rankine's Citizen as well. I think she does a similar thing in that book around racism and class and gender to a lesser extent. And I was just wondering if what you think about that relationship with the reader. Was that
Yeah, gosh. Thank you, Kim. Brilliant and sort of lasering in on something, because I think there's something. We're all conscious, aren't we, that there's a whole load of, for want of other shorthand, culture war stuff going off, and there's a kind of positionality that goes with that. There's a sort of, you're with me or against me, and I know that as a writer, and as a writer in certain other fora, in certain media, that I can feel that pressure to say, to do something rhetorical and say, here, here's the thing, and it becomes quite almost didactic, and sometimes, there's a space for the didactic and the rhetorical. But it seems to me that there's this possibility, at least in poetry. I mean, I'm sure it's in every form of writing, but particularly in poetry, to to I'm going to say something maybe controversial, almost make of the reader. I want to say a co-conspirator, but actually that sounds really dubious. I want to say to make of the reader a co-wrestler with the complexity and the mess, because the thing about poetry is that we're endlessly alert to the limits of words and their slipperiness. And maybe that's true for every kind of writing, but somehow, and maybe it's just me as a poet, I feel like I'm constantly negotiating the limits of my ability to wrangle with words. And therefore there's a sense of come and join me in the
Mm.
problem, in the complexity, in the intimacy of our mystery, almost that sort of sense of I'm saying something and yet it's escaping me just as I think I've got it nailed down. And so much of our discourse, particularly around gender and sex and sexuality, has become something that, again, maybe I'm mixing my metaphors a bit, that you nail your mass, you nail something to your mass, don't you? And it's about positionality. Whereas, I'm very clear about where I am and who I am, but there's something about I want to acknowledge my own lack of grip on myself or on words and
Mm.
on the poems. So
Mm.
come and join me in that.
Yeah, and I think that poem, like, and you're saying, oh, it feels more like a performance piece, but I hope it's not. I think it's an amazing poem, and it doesn't. It feels like this book. It's got like, people say, oh, this poem's the heart of the book, or that's the heart. I think your book has about, I don't know, multiple beating hearts through, but that is one of them for me because it holds all of that theme and that thread of the poem as a made thing, the body as a made thing, and the poem as a body of text, and the embroidery
Yes.
and the stitching and the fragmentation, the way the speech kind of breaks down. And so for me, it kind of like it gathers all of that together in a really amazing way, I think. I'm making statements again instead of questions. I was going
It's
to
all
say
right.
something
Don't
really
worry. We're here to have a conversation.
I was going to say something really stereotyped and sexist then and say I've turned into one of those. Shall I say it? Shall I do
You've
it?
got. I mean, come on.
I
We're
was.
not. There's no one watching.
There's
Um,
nobody here, is there? Um, I've turned into one of those. Sometimes it can be men, but not all men, when they put their hand up in the audience and say, "I've not got a
oh, I know.
question, more a
I'm
comment."
going to make a step.
And I've just done it. Anyway, I'm going to ask one more question before the 6 questions in the Q&A. But, Jasmine has given me the power and there's not, I won't be stopped now. But I just want to ask one general question about the move. I know you've written like loads and loads of books, but in poetry terms, this is what they call the difficult second album, and the move from the first book to the second book. How did you find it? And also, I always think there's like a seed or a bridge from one book to the other, but you don't know at the time where that is
That's
until you've
interesting.
written the book. So I was thinking that you look back now, was there a seed in
Well,
that first book?
I think what is true is that it was. I found this an extraordinarily difficult collection to write. I mean, I think it's fair to say I find writing poems extraordinarily difficult. I think I'm averaging a collection once every 5 years, which is pretty indicative of
But you're making
of
up with it with all the other books as well.
well, yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think the I'm not sure if there was a particular bridge or a seed or a key, but I think what I found is that um it's unlike the previous collection in which there was a character, and that was the character of the priest. And I think a number of people who read that collection would think, oh, the priest in that is just me, but actually wasn't. It was very much a character. For me, it was having, dare I say it, the courage to ask myself the question, why is it that I've been so very cautious about exploring some of the mess and complexity of my own gender identity in poetry? I mean, I've done it in prose, nonfiction, as well as in a bit of fiction as well. Um, but then because I didn't want it then to become, and I want to hear you to hear this right, merely confessional, as it were. I didn't want it just to be a kind of sense of this is expressive. I need to get something out. I I need to have the courage to say, I want to get to know Eleanor better, but I also want to dare, and this is where I still have questions about this. I would want to say, okay, Eleanor, um, I want to give you this imaginary archive. I want to give you this time traveling capacity, but also acknowledge that I'm feeding me into her as well. And I just had to write and write and write and write endless, I mean, hundreds of lines it felt to try and find a a kicking off point where I could begin to speak of these multiple Eleanors across time and space and context. And that was really that's what and that took me a long, long time, about a year really, of playing around. Um Curiously, then I came back to the seven proof texts on a transition body, and that really began to fall into space. But that's not an Eleanor poem, really. I mean, that is my most, I suppose, personal poem I've written, which brings together that wrestling with the body, with the inevitable mess and strangeness of transition, um, and how the medical body relates to what we sometimes call the natural body. And yeah, sorry,
Mm.
I'm rambling now, aren't I? I'm
No, no,
rambler.
it's absolutely fascinating, and my mind is going off into loads of tangents as you're talking. So I was thinking about Eleanor kind of being a muse, like in the I was thinking of Ted Hughes's Crow, which is and
Well, yeah,
Christopher
yeah.
Reed's Mr. Mouth, and these kind of
Yeah.
constructions of these figures that come to help us
But
speak.
I wanted to, the thing is that I think the tension for me is yes, there is this, oh gosh, Eleanor, what a fascinating character person, and there's Rolandina Ronchai, who's also referenced in the book, another sort of medieval trans woman. But there was this. I mean, maybe it's the religious bit of me. Also, there's a kind of ethical sense of not just wanting to treat Eleanor as my plaything,
And I think
which
that comes through because one of my favorite poems in the book is Eleanor in the beginning, and I just think she's so I feel like she's really talking back there and being
she
quite
is.
challenging and provocative. And I took that, I've been running daily writing workshops all through January, and I showed that poem to the 250 people that were on the Zoom call, and we were arguing. We weren't arguing. I was pontificating about who Eleanor is talking to in that poem. Is she
Right.
talking to the reader? Is she talking to the writer? Is she talking to God? Is she talking?
Yeah.
Who is she talking to? And I said, I'm going to ask Rachel. I can put her on the spot when I see her. So, who is she talking to, Rachel, in that poem?
All of the above. All of the above.
That's a very good answer. And that means
Thank you.
nobody wins because poetry is not a game for winning.
That's absolutely
Um,
right.
right, I'm going to go to some of these questions in the box because I'm hogging you. So there's a question which I think a few questions touch on about the use of complex material and referencing and how you manage holding all of this. How do you navigate when you're composing and editing what's not well known and could be difficult to understand, but you want to stay enough form the backbone, and on the other hand, reaching out to the reader and writing in a way that the poem can be readily accessed. Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
so how do you handle
gosh,
that research?
uh, it would be easy to say something facetious like badly. I think the sort of honest answer is that, as my family would testify, my siblings and my mum, I'm just, I'm a bit of a magpie. I'm just someone who just sucks in information, and I have this hunger for stuff, as it were. Um, so there is a sense in which, I just will read omnivorously, and it just sort of goes in there, it sticks in there. I make notes. I'm very conscious, and I think it's something which I'd like to feel that I'm beginning to handle a little bit better. Is I think that there have been times, as I've sought to, I suppose, develop as a poet, where I've used my capacity for research and my interest in the obscure and the deployable bit of knowledge or whatever. I've used that as a way of masking really my limitations as a poet. I like to feel that what I'm doing now is I want to attend not only to the sort of basic integrity of the poem, because I don't know about you, Kim. I often find that as I'm writing on a draft, I feel it's getting away from me. And then I come back and I find a way of working with it to sort of find, it's not even the through line, but just having that sense of, I think I know what my obsessions are, and I'm quite an obsessive person, and I have these obsessions around language and liturgy and body and sexuality and gender. I get that sense of things are starting to sing, starting to work when it's working in concert together. So, take that poem, which I probably should have offered a little bit more of a gloss on, the Perpetua poem, where I talk about a Dauerwunder. A Dauerwunder is a vial of miraculous blood. It's this, and but it's the physicality of that concept which I want to communicate, but I also want to communicate the sensuality of the word itself. I mean, I even talk about, it becomes porn, Dauerwunder. There's something incredibly sensual about those syllables. And I think so it's about the sound, it's the taste in my mouth, it's that sense of working with the purpose and intention. And because I'm pretty clear on, I think I know my own obsessions at this point, and I just have to work with them. and that's so when I'm deploying that kind of quite specific, sometimes what feels kind of obscure knowledge, I'm trying to do it in such a way that's not there to intimidate, but actually to say, hey, if you attend to that, I've got a strong sense that that's going to open things up for you further.
Mm.
And it'll either open it up in terms of the soundscape, the sound of the poem, the sound world of the poem, or you might go off and, yeah, read up on it. And then you think, oh gosh, I see another horizon
Mm.
in in these words.
Yeah, I feel like there was so many times when I was read the book the first time, I was looking up stuff, and it felt like I love books that send the reader outside of their own covers. So there's all these paths kind of and rabbit holes, like internet rabbit holes that I then fall down, and then I have to make my way back into the book. Like I love stuff like that. When I've got
And that's that wormhole thing. That's the thing about how time works. I mean, I love that you pick. There is a circularity to time, and again, there's that deeply religious concept there. Christian time is a circular time. Advent through back to Advent, just round and round, but it spirals, and you go in there's a sort of wormhole to religious time.
mm,
So yeah, I love that rabbit hole wormhole thing.
yeah, brilliant. Thank you. We've only got 7 minutes, and I feel like we could talk for another hour. I need to answer some more questions, otherwise I'm going to be sacked um as the host. So Gregory Woods has put an interesting question up. So as a trans writer, do you feel you can contribute to a ready poetic tradition, or do you feel the need to create one, or is that not a concern for you?
Gosh. Well, hi, Gregory. It's always good to hear from you. And as you know, I'm a huge fan of your work. I think it's a terrific question. It's something which I have given a little bit of thought to. I mean, I feel like that, and you know, this is controversial, I guess, because I mean, as you know, you will know, Gregory. I mean, there is a you know, there's a long and respectable history of you know what we might call gay poetry or lesbian poetry. There is that you know, and there are these antecedents, and there are these mother figures and father figures and muses even. Trans poetry, I'm less sure on that. But what I'm more confident about is that there is a sense of queer poetry that is emergent, but I'm not sure we've quite settled on what that means yet. And actually, it would be unqueer, wouldn't it, at one level to settle on what it means? Queer is you know generally operates in the verb mode. It's about queering stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean, I you know there are certainly you know, poets from sort of lesbian and gay history, not least yourself, Gregory, who have been key influencers on me because I think one of the things that LGBTQIA people generally hold in common is a sense of the beauty, but also the problem of the body and the wonder of the body and the strangeness of the body and the delight of the body. And so I think that's where I find sort of solid ground
Mm,
in sort of body poetry, embodied poetry.
yeah, that's really interesting. That it comes back to the body again. There's a question about the body somewhere. Hold on. She says seamlessly going from one to the other. Um, Ruth Harley has said one of the things I love about this collection is how it is both very physical and very numinous. I wonder if you could say a bit about how the spiritual and material intertwine in your writing and the relationship between embodiment and the divine. This might be the last question.
Okay, gosh. Well, hi Ruth. Good to hear from you and thank you for your question. Very hard to capture that briefly. I mean, except to say that I suppose the inheritance, the tradition of which I am part, which is, you know, profound, you know, Christian, is profoundly embodied, but bodies are never reductive matters. You know, we can talk about cells, we can talk about genes, we can talk about all of that materiality, but the materiality itself somehow is always gesturing beyond itself into meaning and sense and possibility and mystery. One of the lines that I use early on is about you know not knowing what bodies can do, and that's it. You know the way I use it is a kind of vague translation of something that Gilles Deleuze talks about. You know we do not know what bodies can do, and what Deleuze is, I think is gesturing towards is that sense of at the moment we think we've closed down and closed out. At that point, the bodies, dare I say it, the body of Christ is eruptive and explodes our limited narratives. At the very moment that someone is telling us that, I mean, as someone once told me, who was not influenced by science, but not a scientist, that I would say they were scientistic, but saying, well, here's the thing, Rachel, you know, science is going to come along and offer a reductive explanation, not only of the body, but of literature and of poetry. And, you know, we'll just end up with basically just a whole bunch of zeros and ones. And I want to say, even if we end up with zeros and ones, we're going to end up saying, well, yeah, but what does that actually mean? How does that relate to other zeros and ones? So there's this sort of sense of the the numinous, the transcendent, that which is eruptive and breaking out of bounds, is always pregnant and possible within the material.
Mm.
You know, that is just the queerness of bodies, the wonder of bodies. And for me, I guess, a signal, without getting too preachy about it, of what one of the things we mean when we use the word divine.
Mm. Yeah. I was thinking then as well of the this Judith Butler quote, which I'm going to misquote really badly, but it's from a book called Giving an Account of Oneself. I don't know if you know that one, but
I do.
and
I do.
she says something like, when you're giving an account, when you're telling, I do not know what effect the telling is going to have on me or on you. So this idea of the telling, the which I think of as the poem, the story,
Yes.
it's going to change both of us.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. I think we've run out of time, Rachel. There's only 1 minute left, and look, Jasmine's come
Sadly. And
to
she's back
silence
to
us. We're
stop
being
us.
silenced, Rachel. We're being
Oh,
silenced.
I'm
I'm so sorry.
dreadful.
It's the worst job. Like having to stop these conversations when they've just started getting going. Yeah, I'm sorry it went so quickly. Thank you both so much. It was great to hear you chatting like that. And thank you guys for your amazing questions and all of your messages in the chat. It's been such a beautiful hour. So yeah, thank you and congratulations, Rachel, of course. Yeah, big congratulations. So for you guys, I have put the link in the chat again. There is the discount code. Please go and buy a copy of the book. It'll come as an email tomorrow, so you don't need to do it right now. Don't worry about that. And as ever, if you oh, I know we should be able to go to the pub, whoever said that in the chat. Like that's what we should do now. Um, um, if you can't get hold of the book through the website, or you have any problems, just email me and I will try to help you. So last thing is please join us next week. We're launching a prose book, a rare prose book for Carcanet Press. It is called The Devil Prefers Mozart, and it's a collection of Anthony Burgess's writings on music. We're launching that with Paul Phillips, the editor, who is a Burgess scholar and composer himself. And he'll be with us online next Wednesday evening. So that's in the chat too. Please sign up to the newsletter so you know what's going on, etc., etc. Okay, I'm going to leave the chat open for the last few minutes so you can put your final goodbyes in there, but I'm going to turn us off now. So thanks again.
Yeah, put the last bits of love for Rachel, so because she'll be reading it later on, won't you? Fill the chat up with love.
Thanks, guys. Bye bye.